Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, August 25th, 2022. A federal judge ordering a redacted version of the affidavit used to obtain a search warrant for former President Donald Trump's Florida home to be unsealed on Friday. The order comes hours after the Justice Department submitted a proposal to the judge on how it wanted portions of the affidavit kept secret or redacted if the document were to be made public. We'll talk about this with a USA Today Justice Department reporter. We'll also talk with that reporter about the appointment this week of a new Secret Service director who will be dealing with the case of why the Secret Service deleted text messages related to the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol during the counting of the presidential electoral votes, which Donald Trump lost. Some mixed feedback from Congress to President Joe Biden's college student loan forgiveness program and more questions to the White House press secretary about it. Homeland Security Department codifying an immigration policy known as DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, in an attempt to guard against legal challenges. More U.S. airstrikes on Iran-backed militant groups in Syria after they target U.S. troops. Russian forces occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine goes offline. And U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, the victim of swatting for a second time this week. Swatting is when law enforcement is called to your home in the middle of the night in a fake emergency call. Associated Press reporting a judge ordered the Justice Department on Thursday to make public a redacted version of the affidavit it relied on when federal agents searched the Florida estate of former President Donald Trump to look for classified documents. We get the latest from USA Today Justice Department reporter Kevin Johnson.
The magistrate in Florida, the federal magistrate in Florida, ordered the release of a redacted version of the Justice Department's affidavit that supported the search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate on August the 8th. His order came just a couple hours after the Justice Department submitted the redacted version of the document. So it seems to indicate that that barring an appeal by the department, which they could do, then we could see at least something by noon tomorrow.
Do we have any idea what type of information might be released and what type might be redacted?
Yeah, just a hint of that. The judge's order was very brief, just 2 pages, but he indicated agreement with the department that there was ample reason to redact information about witnesses, about tactics, and so I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot of the meat of what the Justice Department's affidavit actually says.
The move to release this affidavit, even in redacted form, was to provide the public some underlying justification, what was used for the search. What type of justification might there be in that affidavit?
Well, as I mentioned, that there's some highly sensitive information in there that the department has hinted at, including witnesses that have come forth, witnesses that evidence that they have already gathered in this case. But there's also another part of the affidavit that we might likely get a sense of, and that's the process by which the department moved before taking the action or seeking the action to search Trump's property. That would be perhaps a timeline of all of the efforts short of a search that they made to obtain the information that they were looking for. So we might see a sense of how hard the department and federal authorities work to get that information back before they move to search.
We're talking with USA Today Justice Department reporter Kevin Johnson. You wrote another story this week, President Joe Biden naming former career Secret Service official Kimberly Cheadle as the agency's new director at a time when the service faces intense scrutiny on multiple fronts. First, who is Kimberly Cheadle, and why a new director now?
Kimberly Cheadle, first, is a former career Secret Service official. She was the first woman to head the elite protective division of the agency, and had also served on then Vice President Joe Biden's protective detail during the Obama administration. She has a long, as I mentioned, nearly 3 decades with the agency, had recently left for a job with PepsiCo, but is being called back to public service. The reason for the move now is that Director James Murray announced his intention to retire. He had, initially indicated that was going to come earlier this summer, but he extended some time until the decision was made to appoint Ms. Cheadle and also deal with some of the issues that we reference in the piece.
And that scrutiny involving some missing Secret Service texts.
Yeah, there's scrutiny on a couple of levels. One is what you mentioned about the missing texts, which were disclosed by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General, and these missing communications occurred around key times, the 5th and 6th of January 2021. There was an immediate suspicion as to why this information had gone missing. The Secret Service has asserted that there was no wrongdoing here, that they were migrating information at that time from one phone service to another, and that's how that text material went missing. There is also another part of the agency which has been swept into the January 6th investigation being conducted by the Special House Committee. As you'll recall, and the listeners will recall, there was some dramatic testimony provided by Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to the then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, in which she described having been told about a confrontation inside the limousine in which Trump fought to force the Secret Service to take him to the Capitol along with the rioters. And as we learned during Ms. Hutchinson's testimony, the Secret Service prevailed and moved him back to the White House at that time. So their actions are being scrutinized with the missing texts, and agents are serving as witnesses in the January 6th investigation.
And this is an appointment. Does it require a Senate confirmation?
It does not. No. This is a presidential appointment, and so no Senate confirmation required.
Kevin Johnson is a Justice Department reporter with USA Today. Find his stories at usatoday.com. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And that new Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, was interviewed on the Secret Service podcast Standing Post last year. Here she talks about when and why she joined the Secret Service.
I was fortunate enough to start a couple of years after I graduated from college. I actually applied with the Secret Service while I was still in college. I was getting ready to graduate. I was about 2 months away from graduating and put in my application. And the local office that I applied through, I think it was Springfield, Illinois, because I was living in Illinois at the time, contacted me back and said, hey, why don't you graduate first and then come back to us and see if you're a worthy candidate for the Secret Service. So I did. I guess they wanted to make sure I would graduate, which makes sense. I did graduate and then, submitted my application again. I was very fortunate in that this was the only law enforcement application that I put in. I had looked at law enforcement across the United States, federal, local, state law enforcement, and loved the fact that the Secret Service had the integrated mission that we have of both protection and investigations, and was looking for something different and kind of a challenge, and give the utmost respect to local law enforcement that goes out there and every day, they'll conduct a traffic stop and they don't know what they're dealing with, and just thought that going on a federal level and having that dual responsibility would provide a challenge to me. And so I was very fortunate that I put in my application. It took about 2.5 years to get hired. I was pretty persistent. And so I came on in 1995.
That's Kimberly Cheadle on a Secret Service podcast last year when she was Assistant Director for Protective Operations, elevated this week, appointed by the President to Secret Service Director. On that podcast, she also talked about her views on leadership.
I think as you learn what type of leader you are, as you progress through your life, it is an evolution. And if it's not an evolution, you're probably not that great of a leader. I know that I have definitely grown as I have progressed through my assignments from my first leadership position, certainly to this position here, and have had to kind of change and adapt how I deal with people, how I look at situations. I will say the one thing that I have found to be very beneficial in my career here at the Secret Service is that I have tried to diversify my assignments, and I have found that perspective of that diversity, whether it be serving in the Office of Training or in our inspection division or in field offices where I was in charge of investigations for a region, has allowed me to come to this position here in protective operations and have a better idea of what it takes to be a good protection agent and how I should resource the Office of Protective Operations more appropriately. I've tried to challenge myself with each assignment that I've had, because I think if you're not stretching yourself, then you're not learning. And so that would be what my go-to or my fallback is on perspective of leadership.
Kimberly Cheadle in 2021 on a Secret Service podcast. She was Assistant Director then. This week, President Biden appointed her as Director of the Secret Service, putting out a statement saying, Jill Biden, and I know firsthand Kim's commitment to her job and to the Secret Service's people and mission. When Kim served on my security detail when I was Vice President, we came to trust her judgment and counsel. She is a distinguished law enforcement professional with exceptional leadership skills and was easily the best choice to lead the agency at a critical moment for the Secret Service. She'll oversee, according to the Secret Service frequently asked questions page, approximately 3,200 special agents, 1,300 uniformed division officers, and more than 2,000 other technical, professional, and administrative support personnel. Budget of the Secret Service, about $3 billion a year. This is Washington Today. Lots of reaction pouring into President Biden's plan announced on Wednesday to forgive college student debt. $10,000 per person, $20,000 for people who use Pell Grants. Income threshold, you must make under $125,000 for an individual per year or $250,000 for a couple. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, tweeting, POTUS's decision to cancel a big chunk of student debt is a big deal. This will provide relief to middle-class Americans who've struggled the most with student debt. But Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, with this tweet, Americans who didn't go to college or paid their debt should have to foot the bill for someone else's education to fulfill a Biden campaign promise. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre getting more questions from reporters today during her daily briefing.
The president often says that we're not in a recession because we've got, record job market, record low unemployment, businesses investing in America at record rates. Mm-hmm. So why are those appropriate conditions to forgive student debt?
Well, thank you for laying out all the work that the president has done. That is 1,000% correct. But we've also said that we know that some people are still suffering. You've heard us say that too. Yes, the economy can be turned back on, and we've created, to what you've just laid out, nearly 10 million new jobs since the president took office. That matters. The economy is stronger than it's been in some time. And we have said that, you've heard the president say that, there's still some folks who need a little bit more help. And this is what the president is trying to do. Both can be true. It's not one or the other.
Well, the Washington Post editorial board says that,
And then I'm going to go to the back because we're running out of time.
Doesn't help those people though. That it takes money from the broader tax base, mostly made up of workers who didn't go to college, to subsidize education debt of people with valuable degrees. So sort of rebutting what you had just said. But beyond that, there are critics who are saying that this is not about the pandemic, it's not about those conditions, that this is about getting people to vote ahead of the midterms, and that the real national emergency is Democrats in the midterm elections.
Well, I mean, I disagree with everything that you just laid out. I was just asked a question by some Democrats who are saying that they're not happy with this, right? Who are criticizing this. And we have said we're not going to make everybody happy. And so if we are not making everybody happy, you cannot say that, that what you just laid out is certainly cannot be the case either. Look, here's what I will say, and this is just what we have laid out about this program. This is historical, what we're doing. It has never been done before. When you look at the system is broken. And we're trying to reform it so that we can help people who really need it. The way that this president has done this, he's done it in a targeted way, so it helps. It doesn't give a penny to anybody making more than 120. Let me finish. More than 125,000. And if you look at the Pell Grant recipients, we're talking about people again, and I've said this multiple times in this briefing room today, and we said it multiple times yesterday. $60,000 household. We're talking about $60,000 household. And cut in half, right? There are people we're talking about people, Pell Grant recipients that are at $30,000 households. I mean, that's the people that we are going to help. Again, nurses, construction workers, when you think about the reform.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre getting questions from White House reporters. One of those Democrats that she mentioned, she was asked about, not fully on board with this plan. Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, who's running for a Senate seat. He said that the president's proposal on college student debt cancellation is the wrong message to the millions of Ohioans without a degree working just as hard to make ends meet. Biden administration promising that there will be an application for this forgiveness plan in the coming weeks. You can sign up at the Education Department's website to be notified when that application is available. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 322, NASDAQ up 207, S&P up 58. U.S. economy contracted at a slower rate from April to June than the federal government initially thought. The Bureau of Economic Analysis at the Commerce Department says the GDP, gross domestic product, fell at an annual rate of 0.6% in the second quarter, not the 0.9% originally estimated. Labor Department says fewer Americans filed for unemployment insurance benefits last week compared to the week before. It was down 2,000 to 243,000. And California voting to require all new cars, trucks, and SUVs sold in that state to be electric or hydrogen-powered starting in 2035. The vote by the California Air Resources Board. Washington Post writes approval will trigger a ripple effect throughout the auto industry and across the country. A story from CBS News. The Biden administration on Wednesday finalized a rule to transform the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, immigration policy for more than 600,000 so-called Dreamers into federal regulation, a move aimed at protecting the program from legal challenges that imperil its existence. Since its inception, CBS News goes on, DACA has allowed hundreds of thousands of unauthorized immigrants who arrived in the U.S. as children to live and work in the country legally without fear of deportation. Today, a George Mason University law professor, Ilya Somin, explaining more about why the Homeland Security Department made this move.
DACA is a program that has very broad support and very strong moral and policy justifications, but it also has been legally controversial also almost from its inception. And there are several different kinds of arguments made against DACA. One is particularly relevant to what the Biden administration completed yesterday, which is the argument that this violates the Administrative Procedures Act, which says that for certain kinds of changes of policy, before you can make them, you have to go through this complex process known as the notice and comment process, where you give notice, you're going to issue a new rule or regulation, then interested parties, members of public interest groups and so on can file comments and the like, and the agency is required to consider them and consider various issues. So one of the arguments made in previous litigation about DACA and also the earlier broader DAPA, DAPA program, the courts eventually struck down, was that this was illegal because they didn't go through this notice and comment process. I think, I'm not completely certain, but I think what the Biden administration did yesterday will insulate them against this particular argument, or at least it will greatly strengthen their position. People can still say, well, you didn't do the notice and comment process perfectly, or not every I was properly dotted or T properly crossed or whatever, but they have, I think, fortified themselves against this argument. On the other hand, there is this other set of arguments, which is not about the APA, which say that the administration just didn't have the authority to do this under the immigration laws at all, or at least didn't have the authority to do particular things like grant people permission to work. I think here the weakest link in the administration's position is the part of DACA which says that people accrue lawful presence if they're in the program. Lawful presence is the technical legal term for something that actually doesn't give the immigrant very much, in that all it really does is that it accrues years in case the immigrant stays in the United States long enough to someday be eligible for Social Security and other similar benefits. And if they do become eligible, then they have more years which count in their favor. And however, lawful presence is the best argument that the red states and others have for saying that this is not just an exercise of executive discretion, but rather that it's trying to change the legal status of people. So I advise friends in the administration or friends with contacts there, maybe they should just drop the lawful presence part and keep the rest, because the rest is vastly more important as a practical matter. It enables people to stay and live in the United States, to work in the United States, to go to school. Whether they're accruing lawful presence is pretty insignificant compared to that. But yet this is sort of the biggest Achilles heel when this issue goes to court. This is the thing that people always fasten on because it's legally more vulnerable, and also because it sounds bad. It sounds like you're changing the law, even if you're really not.
Ilya Solman is a George Mason University law professor, part of today's panel at the Bipartisan Policy Center, looking at the court's impact on immigration policy, absence of congressional action, and occasional executive action. Fox News writing, New York City officials slammed Texas Governor Greg Abbott as they welcome more migrants arriving on buses from Texas Thursday morning. 3 buses had already arrived from Texas, with 1 more expected, for a total of more than 200 asylum seekers coming to the Big Apple. This is after a record 237 asylum seekers arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal on Wednesday. That from Fox News. Governor Abbott, Republican, was interviewed today on the Fox News channel.
Most of America has not really understood the magnitude of the problem that we have on the border until we started sending these buses up to New York. Remember, this is not a Texas problem. This is an American problem caused by the President of the United States of America. And so many people have been blind to this until suddenly buses of migrants started showing up in their city, which is a sanctuary city, by the way. But we still have an open invitation to the mayor of New York to come down to Texas and see exactly what's going on. Americans in places like New York would benefit from that, because if all Americans saw what we see every single day, they would be trying to put pressure on the president, like we have been doing, to change the president's policies. Remember this, 2 years ago, we had the lowest border crossings in decades. And then when President Biden took over, he eliminated all of the policies that created a secure border. And now we have the highest number of illegal border crossings ever.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Fox News Channel this morning. The office of New York City Mayor Eric Adams releasing video of some of the migrants from Texas getting off the buses in New York City and having wristbands with barcodes on them cut off. The New York City Immigrant Affairs Commissioner Manuel Castro spoke about it to the CBS New York affiliate.
Governor Abbott is barcoding people in treating them as less than human, as if they were cattle. I was incredibly shocked when I saw children with bracelets and barcodes and security personnel treating them as less than human beings. It appears to us that asylum seekers are being asked to wear these bracelets with these barcodes to intimidate them, to scare them into remaining in these buses until they arrive in New York City. We know that Governor Abbott has been trying to dehumanize people, trying to foment anti-immigrant hatred. And while New York will continue to welcome asylum seekers, it's also our moral responsibility to denounce this kind of behavior by Governor Abbott.
Manuel Castro, New York City Immigrant Affairs Commissioner, portions of his interview with a New York TV station on Wednesday. Texas Governor Greg Abbott's press office putting out a statement that reads, "These bracelets are standard protocol for voluntary transport by the Texas Division of Emergency Management and have been used during times of natural disasters like hurricanes when needed to transport people to safety." Mayor Adams and his administration need to stop with the baseless lies and fear-mongering. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Friday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m., Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell speaks at the annual Economic Policy Symposium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Then at 11 a.m. Eastern, reporters from Afghanistan and the U.S. discuss the state of press freedom in Afghanistan 1 year after the Taliban took control of the government. Listen on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A story at CNN, the U.S. carried out additional airstrikes targeting enemy positions and rocket launchers in northeast Syria following a rocket attack on coalition bases in the region that injured 3 U.S. troops on Wednesday, according to a U.S. official. The military exchanges come at a critical time for U.S. and Iranian relations, as there's been some progress on reviving the Iran nuclear deal aimed at preventing Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. Today, State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedat Patel taking reporters' questions on this during a tele-news conference.
Let's next go to the line of Hiba Nasser.
Hi, and thanks for taking my question. My first question about Iran. Iranian Foreign Minister today said that they would not allow the IAEA baseless accusation to remain. I'm stating his words. So they are opposing that the investigation could go on after the deal. Is there a room for you to stop the investigation? This is my first question. My second question, what do you make from these attacks against the U.S. troops in Syria, since they are happening now when you are closer to a deal with Iran? Thank you.
Thanks. Let me answer the first part first. So our position on this has been quite clear, and we have communicated this repeatedly in public and in private to Iran. Iran needs to answer the IAEA's questions. That is the only way to address these issues. Once the IAEA Director General reports to the Board of Governors that the outstanding issues have been clarified and resolved, we expect them to come off the board's agenda, but not before that. We've also been clear that we do not believe there should be any conditionality between reimplementation of the JCPOA and the investigations related to Iran's legal obligations. And on your second question, what I would say about the airstrike, and again, I would reiterate that our colleagues at the Pentagon can speak to some of this additionally, is that whether or not there is a deal, the president's commitment to protect U.S. personnel and confront Iran's activities that jeopardize our people or our partners in the region is unwavering. The nuclear deal has nothing to do with our readiness and ability to defend our people and our interests. We've also been clear that we will ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. We believe diplomacy is the best path to achieving that goal, and as we long have said, we believe pursuing JCPOA talks is in U.S. national security interests, and we're going to continue to do so.
State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel with reporters, speaking to them on the phone. He also, during this news conference, took questions about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Reports today that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, occupied by Russian forces for months, has been disconnected from Ukraine's energy grid for the first time in its history due to fire damage of overhead power lines. That's according to Ukraine's state nuclear power company. Al Jazeera, writing about this, says the blazes broke out in the ash pits of the nearby mainly coal-powered Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant, resulting in the nuclear station's 2 working power units being cut off. Back to the State Department teleconference.
We are closely monitoring the reports that the last 2 operational reactors at ZNPP have been shut down. Ukraine is reporting that all the plant's safety and security systems are working normally, and we have no indications of increased or abnormal radiation levels. I also want to take a minute and applaud the courage and selflessness of Ukraine's personnel at ZNPP for their commitment to nuclear safety and security under the most harrowing and dangerous conditions. But to take a little bit of a step back, it is clear that Russia's shelling and seizure of Ukraine's power plants and infrastructure are part of its strategy to create energy crises in Europe. We strongly condemn any action at ZNPP or elsewhere that impacts the health and welfare of civilians throughout the region. The situation at ZNPP is the result of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, its control of and dangerous military presence at the power plant, and its unwillingness to turn control of the plant back to Ukraine for safe and secure operations. We've said this before, but no country should turn a nuclear power plant into an active war zone, and we oppose any Russian efforts to weaponize or divert energy from the plant. To be very clear, the ZNPP and the electricity that it produces rightly belongs to Ukraine, and any attempt to disconnect the plant from the Ukrainian power grid and redirect to occupied areas is unacceptable.
State Department briefing with the Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel on a teleconference with reporters. Some other headlines from the war in Ukraine. This from Associated Press. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a major buildup of his country's military forces Thursday in an apparent effort to replenish troops that have suffered heavy losses in 6 months of bloody warfare and prepare for a long, grinding fight ahead in Ukraine. The move to increase the number of troops by 137,000 or 13% to 1.15 million by the end of the year came amid chilling developments on the ground in Ukraine. That from AP. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowing to make Russia bear responsibility for a rocket attack against a Ukrainian train station that killed more than 20 people during the country's Independence Day. 3 more ships leaving Ukraine loaded with grain, as a State Department official tells AFP that Ukraine is on course to ship nearly as much grain this month as it did before the Russian invasion, in a triumph for international efforts to ease food shortages. On that subject of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the global food crisis, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, was at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs today.
We're pulling out all the stops to deal with this perfect storm of COVID and climate and conflict that has been exacerbated by the Russian attack on Ukraine. And we're very supportive of the Secretary General's efforts to open up the Black Sea to get food out of Ukraine through Odessa. But it is just a small step right now to start to address those problems. It is not the answer. The answer is for Russia to stop its unprovoked attack on Ukraine. And that will be the quarter for which we will start to address the impact of this conflict on the food crisis. Russia has attacked Ukrainian farms. They've stolen wheat from their silos. And until recently, they blocked the access to the Black Sea. The impact is long-term, and it's going to take several years before we're able to start to address the impact that they've had on this. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop. We have to continue the effort and do everything possible because, again, this has had a global impact. When I was in Africa, I heard from, I went to a farm and here's a woman who is a farmer. She had 5 acres that she planted. Because of the price of fertilizer, she's only able to plant 1 acre. So we're talking about dropping down to 20% of her production because she can't afford the price of fertilizer because the vast majority of the fertilizer and ammonia come from Russia. Others talked about the price of food in the market. I went into the market and women were saying, first, to get this vat of tomatoes, this is what it cost me, but I can't get my money back because people can't afford to purchase the tomatoes at the price that she bought them for. So she's feeling that, and women who are actually purchasers are feeling it. And then I come here to Chicago and go to an urban farm and hear a discussion about the impact of the urban desert on communities here in Chicago. And having these urban farms is one way of addressing this issue. And I talked to them about how they can use the technology and experience that they have gathered here to work with African women on kitchen gardens and how they can address issues, alternative uses of for fertilizer so that they're not so dependent on fertilizer.
Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations in Chicago at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, a program looking at global food. She also visited, while in Chicago, the Urban Growers Collective. CBS Chicago writes it builds urban farms and gardens to help get fresh foods to people in underprivileged areas in Chicago. This is Washington Today. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been swatted at her home in Rome, Georgia, for a second time this week. The second incident happening early Thursday morning at 2:43 a.m. Eastern. Swatting is a harassment technique, someone sending in a false report of a violent crime happening in progress, causing police SWAT teams to respond to a home, frightening, intimidating that victim. The second incident had a person identifying themselves as Wayne Green, claiming they came out as transgender, possibly shot their family, and saying, if anyone tried to stop me from shooting myself, I will shoot them. The police report from the first incident, Wednesday around 1 a.m. Eastern, also had a transgender connection. Police say that after someone called 911 using a computer-generated voice, claimed responsibility, and said they were upset about Congresswoman Green's stance on transgender youth rights. The Congresswoman was on America's Real Voice TV on Wednesday describing that first swatting.
I was sound asleep. Of course, never expected anyone to be coming to my house at that time in the morning. Heard some knocks on the door, heard my doorbell, saw some lights outside, heard people outside my windows in my yard. And I jumped out of bed, threw my clothes on, and I picked up my gun. That was my instinct because I'm a gun owner. I'm a Second Amendment supporter, and I believe in defending myself. And normally I answer the door with a gun, especially if it's someone that I don't expect coming to my home. But for some reason, I had this weird gut instinct to not take my gun with me to the front door, which was very out of norm for me. So I put my gun down and I just went down the hallway, and the house was still dark. And I came around the corner and looked out the windows, and I saw the police outside, and they had their guns. They were ready because they had received a terrible phone call to the 911 center. And so I walked up there and I saw them. I was really startled, and I couldn't think, like, why are they here? Did something bad happen? That was what I was thinking. I thought maybe someone had been hurt or killed, and they were coming to talk to me about it. And I opened the door, and the officer standing there, he said, "Ma'am, are you okay? Is everything okay here?" But it was the body posture of the police that was really concerning me. Like, it had me I was upset. I was afraid. I was like, there's something terribly wrong. And I said, yeah, I'm okay. I was sleeping. I'm like trying to understand what they're doing. And he said, hold on, let me get my sergeant. And then they came from around the corner and came up the steps and told me that someone had called in to the 911 call center here in Rome, Georgia, and had reported that someone had shot either her husband or her boyfriend 5 times in the chest in a bathtub. And then they were sending the police to supposedly go help. But then they called back a second time and said, there's children in the home. So with those phone calls, they were setting up a very serious, dangerous scenario in a home, right? And police officers, when they get those kind of calls, they know what they're going into. They have to be prepared for it. They have to get there immediately. It sounds like they made it sound like there were children in danger at our house. And so the police officers, they got to my house so fast. But then I said, no, this is all wrong. I said, come inside. I brought them inside. I said, they said, yeah, we realize what's happened is you've been swatted. And they were upset, rightfully so, and angry. And I was very upset. I could not believe someone would do that. And I was shocked because not only did they put my life and my family's life in danger, they also put the police officers' lives in danger. And so whoever this person is, they deserve to be locked up.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, interviewed Wednesday on America's Real Voice TV after the first swatting incident. Since then, there has been a second incident, and the local police in Georgia are investigating in conjunction with the U.S. Capitol Police. WXIA-TV, the NBC affiliate in Atlanta, writes that swatting is punishable by federal law under the Interstate Swatting Hoax Act, passed by Congress in 2015. Those who violate the law could face prison time ranging from 5 years up to life in prison, depending upon the severity of the circumstances, including whether any injuries or deaths happen. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Remember, you can get the stories making news in Washington sent to you every day in your inbox by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.